All right, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for being here. My name is Andy Davey, and I serve as the Community Program Analyst here at Madison Community Foundation, working with the Community Impact Department and Tom Linfield. We will be recording today's session for those who couldn't join us, and also if you want to view it again later. And we will be posting it on our website in the near future to make it available to anyone in our community. We weren't quite sure how many people were going to show up today. We invited a rather large group, but it's a good size, actually a great size, but kind of on the smaller side. So we didn't make the video capacity available for everyone to sort of interact that way together, but we hope that the chat can be a lively space for you all to post thoughts, and so in that spirit, if you wouldn't mind, feel free to go ahead and introduce yourself, just name and organization. I think many of you know each other here, so it'll be good to make that connection. And as Liz just posted in the chat, we're going to try to use the Q&A function for specific questions you have for the presenters. So just a little bit of framing before handing it over to our presenters today, Annalee and Anthony. So this webinar is part of ongoing efforts by MCF to offer capacity building and learning resources to our grantees, fund holders, and the nonprofit community at large. But it's also part of a new collaboration we're really excited about with the Wisconsin Center for Education Research that is not only about helping you guys learn and build your capacity, but it's helping us as a foundation learn, help us improve the way we think about and engage in evaluation. And so we're really trying to come from a position of funder humility about what we don't know and how we can build our capacity as well. And the spirit of this collaboration is really to foster evaluation that's meaningful and useful to you all doing the work and to the community members that you're working with, rather than some sort of burdensome or frustrating number crunching or report generation that too often is what is involved with evaluation. And so to achieve that, evaluation must be equitable and culturally responsive. And so that really is the core theme of today's session. And that part of that is being attentive to power. Who has the power to determine what's being measured and assessed, why it's being measured and assessed, and who's doing that assessment. And it also means that we as a funder need to be in a relationship of mutual learning with you all about what's happening in our community and how we can work together to bring about positive change. So with that initial introduction, I'm very excited to have our two fabulous educators and veteran practitioners of culturally responsive and equitable evaluation here, Annalee Good and Anthony Hernandez. And in just a moment, I'm going to pass it over to them to say a little bit more about their backgrounds and how the session is going to run today. But just one last encouragement for those of you who haven't introduced yourselves, please just pop your name and organization in the chat, which most of you have done. So thank you. All right, over to Annalee and Anthony.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Andy. We really appreciate being here. My name is Annalee Good, and I'm at the Wisconsin Center for Education Research. And we're really excited to jump in today to talk more about culturally responsive and equitable evaluation. Dr. Hernandez, pass it over to you for some introduction.
So thank you. I just completed my PhD at UW-Madison, and I'm now at WCER, also working on evaluation matters with Dr. Good.
Great, thank you. So some of our, we've got some guiding questions. First, though, I want to express some gratitude for all of you for being here, especially given all that people are navigating. I want to say thank you to Madison Community Foundation for even creating this space for learning and for reflection, and for all who have done this work before us that we're going to learn and build from. I also want to acknowledge and show appreciation to the Ho-Chunk Tribal Nation, upon whose ancestral land called Dejope I'm sitting on right now. If you want to know more about the land that you're sitting on, this is a wonderful resource I'm going to put into the chat right now. Also want to acknowledge that we're in very challenging times, and although we are looking forward to the ability to connect, we know people are navigating a lot. So again, really want to show appreciation and understanding for what people are doing to be here today. So why are we here today? In general, we're here because we need to do better for all of us. And so that means that we need to do things differently because the way that we're doing them are not getting us there. So culturally responsive and equitable evaluation is one seemingly small but really powerful way to do things differently. So today we're going to talk about what program evaluation is in general and why we do it. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about what makes program evaluation culturally responsive and equity focused, and then talk more about where we're gonna, where there are some resources to learn more. We really hope that today is reflection focused and action focused. So first of all, what is evaluation and why do we do it? This is a slide that some of our youth evaluation team members created. We have a number of youth evaluation teams that we work with around Madison, including one at Centro Hispano of Dane County. There's a team of youth evaluators that put together this slide as a way for us to understand what is evaluation. So we all evaluate all the time. You all are evaluating the temperature in the room that you're sitting in. You're evaluating the tone of my voice. Program evaluation is a systematic and focused way to evaluate or to make sense of or figure out what's going on when it comes to a program or a project or an initiative. It's essentially group learning to make things better. The evaluation process has multiple steps, and some of this is going to look familiar to many of you. We're going to talk a lot about these different phases, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time right now. But these are the typical phases of doing program evaluation. So first, getting organized and defining the it. In other words, what are you hoping to evaluate? Why are you hoping to evaluate? Oftentimes logic models and theories of action are where they live in this first stage of getting organized. Then you ask questions, you design a plan. How are you systematically going to figure out what's going on with that it that you're defining? You're going to gather information or data, make sense of those data. You're going to share it out. And then you're going to hopefully take action on it. You're going to implement and act for change within either the context of the program and then hopefully in the larger context in which you find yourself. So this is a typical phases of what program evaluation looks like. So why do we do evaluation? So I'm going to take a pause here for a second. And I want you to think about a one-word response to this question. Why do we do evaluation? And when you're ready, and if you're feeling up for it, go ahead and put that one word into the chat. And there's no right or wrong. We all evaluate all the time for lots of different reasons. So go ahead and drop a one-word response to how you would reflect on this question. Great, thank you. Seeing a lot of improvement, learning, for funding, for revision. Yep, great. So lots of themes around growth and change and reflection in there. Wonderful. So to reflect on that a little bit more, there are a lot of really compelling reasons to do evaluation. I hope so, because it's also job security for us that people want to do evaluation. So evaluation can build a really strong evidence base for what you're doing and why. It can be a very, very important part of program improvement. And obviously, many funders require it. It also is a way to communicate your story to the public, for example, and to your stakeholders. One of the things we're going to talk about today is what if we do program evaluation? What if we constructed program evaluation in a way that was for systems change? And what does that look like for it to be systems change? What do we mean for something to be about systems change? So within all these different reasons why we do evaluation, oftentimes evaluation can still feel very vulnerable. And to Andy's earlier point, a lot of that has to do with power and how power dynamics within the context of evaluation play out. It has to do with who gets to set the criteria of worth, who gets to set the criteria of impact, whose voices are included and engaged all along the process. This is why we're going to focus in on culturally responsive and equitable evaluation. because many of these different dynamics around power and equity and systems change, we have to do things differently. So what makes evaluation culturally responsive and equitable? So culture is at the center of this idea of culturally sensitive or culturally responsive evaluation. Culture is at the center of who we are as humans and how we make sense of ourselves as humans. It's how we organize and how we structure and how we communicate with one another. So if culture is how we give order and meaning, why in the world would we try to remove it from a process that is intended to systematically understand the things that humans are doing to make meaning and to grow and improve? When we think about the tenets or the principles of culturally responsive and equitable evaluation, so I should note, and we're going to share some resources later on today, there is a well-established framework for culturally responsive and equitable evaluation. Many scholars have studied how this plays out. Many practitioners have used it for decades. So when we use this term, culturally responsive, equitable evaluation, it's invoking a framework that is very much established and in play as long as we choose it to be so. So the underlying tenets and principles of culturally responsive and equitable evaluation, there's kind of three major ones. So in the middle is culture. And when we say culture, again, cultural identities, cultural context, not only of ourselves, but also of those that we're working with. So central to this is that we are critically reflecting on cultural identities, cultural contexts. You are also constantly critically reflecting on power dynamics, on the structural and systemic contexts that show up in the work that you're doing. For example, how does institutionalized racism show up in the outcomes that you're hoping to achieve, in the contexts that are surrounding the programming that you're doing? A second underlying principle of CREE is engaging stakeholders. So those closest to the work and those closest to the potential impacts of the program that you're focusing in, and in whose names and interests this work is being done, are key to actually doing valid evaluation work. So again, pay attention to power dynamics in the engagement of stakeholders. For example, having authentic engagement, not tokenizing. Lastly, a central part of culturally responsive and equitable evaluation is that you're acting for change. The systems that are surrounding the work that we do have oftentimes more impact on the outcomes that we're hoping for than tinkering around program design. And so if we're doing nothing to address the surrounding context and structures, then we're not going to actually meet the outcomes that we're hoping to meet. Okay, so now we're going to look back at that list of different phases of evaluation, and we're going to think differently in the ways that we might embed culturally responsive practices in what we're doing. So whereas traditional evaluation is sometimes more of a magnifying glass, CREE asks us to add a mirror into that mix. So not just a magnifying glass, but also a mirror. We are humans that are part of this system, this social system, that then we are hoping to make sense of. And so we also have to reflect on what lenses we're bringing into our making meaning. So as we get organized and as we define the it, part of defining the it, for example, in a CREE context is to define the surrounding context. Engage stakeholders in the definition of what those important surrounding contexts are. Building an evaluation team that includes the stakeholders in which you're working with. When you ask these guiding questions, ask guiding questions that are going to more likely prompt change and prompt critical reflection. When you design a plan to systematically address these questions, design the plan that include many diverse voices. That takes longer. It takes more resources, but it is more valid. So it increases the validity of the design if it is based on a plan that has many different voices involved in the design of it. When you gather information, collect data in inclusive and accessible ways. So one very straightforward way is making sure that your data collection tools are in the languages of the communities in which you're working. When you make sense of the data, then when you analyze it, co-interpret those data with those closest to the work and with those closest to the impact. That adds to the validity and is core to the validity of the interpretation itself. When you share out, make sure that, again, you're reporting in equally accessible ways to multiple and diverse audiences. And lastly, when you take action, it's not just about acting for improving your program, but how are you going to act towards systems change? So for most of the remainder of today, we're going to do that. We're going to take 2 different case examples and work them through these different phases that I just talked through. So I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Hernandez to bring us into discussion of some case examples.
Thank you, Annalee. So thanks, everybody. I'm happy to join you today. I think that one of the things we want out of this exercise is we want you to be able to take something away that you can use in your own work. And we think one of the ways that we'll illustrate these ideas is through a case example. So for the purposes of this exercise, we've created a fictitious case example, and it's kind of a compilation of many of our own projects. And we're also going to let you begin working on a plan for a program of your own. So the organization that we've come up with here, this fictitious organization, is Community Dental Partners. And their story is that they won a community grant that they're going to work in partnership with other organizations in the community related to dental health care. And so there's going to be programming, an educational component, and then also an incentive is a free dental exam. So we also want you to think about a program that you're thinking about working on. What is it that you want to hold a mirror to? And what do you not know that if you did know would make a difference in what you do? And so that's a very important way to think about the work. What is it that we're trying to achieve? What is it that we need to know so that we can enact that change? Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So we're going to think about our logic model, and we want to think about defining the it. So we have to get at what are some of our core assumptions and what are going to be the activities that are going to lead us to that system change. And in this particular nonprofit organization that we're working with, we're going to engage a youth evaluation team. And I want to think about what are the surrounding context that are going to impact this work. We want you to also think about determining what is the purpose and audience of the evaluation. And then we're going to build that evaluation team. And we want it to be representative of these different voices of stakeholders. So I want you to think a little bit about, in your case, on the project that you're working on, what is the logic for your project? What are you hoping to evaluate? What are you trying to do? And why? What is your why? And with what resources? Next slide, please. Thank you. So very important to the work is asking questions. Developing evaluation, we need real critical reflection. These are some of the general types of questions we might ask. What is happening now? What is the ideal? What is needed to get there? And are we getting there? And Dr. Michael Quinn Patton poses this question, and it's very important to reflect on, again, the what do you not know that if you did know would make a difference in what you do. And so we want all of you to begin with your own case study of thinking about what is one guiding question to start with. So I want you to write down some questions that might be relevant to the project that you're thinking about leading. Have the next slide, please. So the designing of the plan is really important. So very often you have to meet the requirements of the funder. You have to engage your staff in developing a plan, and designing that plan might be, how would you systematically address your questions in ways that include many diverse voices? And then the evaluation plan often includes things, importantly, the background, what's been going on in the context, what are the questions that you've come up with that you need to have answered, what does the data collection look like, and what about the analysis and who will be involved in the analysis. Reporting back is really important in the work that we all do, trying to disseminate the message about our findings. What is the timeline for this particular project, and what does that team look like? So I want you to think a little bit about those questions as you begin to scratch out what your design is going to look like. Have the next slide, please. Thank you. So in terms of gathering information, imagine there might be site interviews, surveys that our youth evaluation team is going to use. There may be community-based conversations that our evaluators are going to have. And you have to think about who could help collecting data on your end in your project. What resources do you have to support your project? So we want to collect that data in an inclusive and accessible ways. Very often that means thinking about it in an intersectional way. Who is in this environment and who are the many identities that manifest? One of the important questions that I like to ask when I think about that is not only who do we hear as a coalition of diverse voices, but who is silent and who is not present. Those are really important considerations also. And then there are a variety of methods, qualitative and quantitative, and mixed methods. And people tend to favor one or both, but I think we're starting to see more that triangulating data using various methods tells a stronger story. And then we would ask everybody to consider participatory methods. And I've had experience working with youth evaluators and people in the community. And I think that it speaks to validity when you can have those diverse voices weigh in as participants in the study. May I please have the next slide? So making sense of the data, the sense making is really important. One of the ideas that we really like is this idea of a data party. And I don't know if you're familiar with a data party, but a data party is this idea that we're going to bring in all of those diverse stakeholders and have them weigh in on the data that we found and help us make sense of that data and interpret it. And that again adds to greater validity, but it's also a great exercise to build relationships within the community. And for some people, it really is a party where you invite folks in for a couple of hours and you have some snacks and you have kind of a good rapport with folks and just going over this data and sense making together. It's a great opportunity. I think you should consider a data party if you get a chance. And again, that's for analyzing the data and co-interpreting the data with those who are closest to its work and its impact. And so for your project, I would have you ask, who are the people who should be in the room when you are making sense of the data that you collect? What would they need to see and in what form? And how often? May I have the next slide, please? So reporting back is really important in our work. And so reporting back to community partners, to families, to various stakeholders in this particular context or orbit. And so I would ask you on your project, who is your audience? What is your purpose? And I would ask you to think creatively about how you report to diverse audiences. And then you want to have a format, structure, and content that's responsive to those particular audiences, especially so that it's equitably accessible. And again, I think we should always be thinking about who's not present or who's rendered invisible. Okay, may I have the next slide, please? So the point of this good work is to be critically reflective and then to create something that is actionable. So in terms of the work that we're doing for this fictitious nonprofit, we're creating a one-page policy brief, for instance, for the organization to use with local decision makers, to explain the context and challenges, to explain what was learned in the evaluation, and some very specific local policy changes that could drive real change using the voices of those diverse stakeholders. So I would challenge you to think about your own projects and say, what changes could you anticipate on individual levels, on organizational levels, on system levels? What recommendations can come out of the evaluation process for policy changes? So we're thinking about taking this action to reflect on findings and adjust program models and implementation, and act for systems change through advocacy, policy change, and community organizing. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Annalee. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you. So we're going to take a moment and let you just absorb and let you spend a little time with that worksheet that we put into chat. And hopefully you're able to open that up, and feel free to make a copy of it or download it. Or if you've got a piece of paper next to you that you want to use to jot down your first initial thoughts. Think about this as potentially an actionable plan for a program or an initiative that you want to know more about. So I'm going to bring us back to, that main, hang on one second. Okay. So I'm going to bring us back to this one so that we all can take a look as you're working at these different phases. So take a moment, and if you haven't yet, identify a program or an initiative or a project that you want to improve, or that you have to create an evaluation plan for, or that you're interested in expanding, and so you want to have a more systematic understanding of what that program is doing and what kind of changes it's having. And then start working through some of these first initial steps. So we're going to take a couple minutes and give you some time. And please, into chat, post questions that you have, post challenges that you have, and please use this space so that Anthony and I can respond and help you as you're thinking through.
Annalee and Anthony, I was thinking it might be helpful. I was curious if you guys had thought through the dental exam case study in particular. Like, could you give a few examples when you're talking about including diverse voices in that example? Like, what does that mean? Does that mean patients? Does that mean dental hygienists that you're working with? Like, can you give some concrete examples of what that looks like? And then also, like, context. Are you talking about the socioeconomic status of the surrounding neighborhood? You're talking about the policy environment. You're talking about the school or partners that you might be working with. Can you just kind of give a little bit of meat on the bones of those kind of more abstract concepts?
Sure, thank you. So let's take this first one. Let's take the get organized part. So when we think about context, you think about what are the things that are surrounding the work that you're doing that impact whether or not outcomes are met, and you might not necessarily have control over, but that, again, impact your potential outcomes. So to your point, Andy, yes, policy context can be an important one. So in this example of the dental program, so there may be, for example, policies surrounding who has access to dental care, and that it's not universal, and that it has to be through particular insurance carriers. And so that there is an important surrounding context that there isn't universal dental care in the county where we're working, let's say. And so that presents a need that the program is hopefully trying to address. But that context is important because what if that policy changes? Or what if part of what you're trying to do is change that policy so that there is more equitable access to dental care? So naming that policy becomes a really important part to understanding. And the next webinar is on logic models and theories of action, but naming that context is really important. You might not understand or know all the different contexts that are important. So including, to your second question, including stakeholders like students, youth, families who you're hoping to serve in the conversation around what are the contexts impacting your ability to access dental care. And so they might come up with something that says, I don't have transportation, like there's a dental clinic, but I can't get there and the bus line doesn't get there. And so that context of transportation deserts is really important to dental care. And maybe you hadn't thought of that. And so that engaging stakeholders in that conversation builds that out. I think another example that we could bring in around engaging stakeholders and understanding not only what the it is, but then also potential changes from the program itself. Anthony mentioned engaging youth evaluators in this process. So for example, in this, in the dental program example that we've got, that if the program is designed to be a community site-based program where there are, you know, kind of pop-up dental education programs and exams at, let's say, parks, or let's say schools, or, you know, libraries, community areas around the community. Engaging youth in the collection of information and data from other youth tends to be oftentimes a more valid way of collecting data. And so training youth around, for example, a quick paper survey, or in the past, we've also had them, you know, have devices, have tablets, where it's a quick 3-question survey where youth are coming up to families, youth are coming up to other youth and saying, tell me, why'd you come today? You know, that gets at the needs. And then tell me more about your experience here. You know, maybe there's a bunch of different words that prompt reflection on, was this meeting what you know, was this doing what you were hoping it would do? And then a question about, what are you hoping for next? Like, what would you like that you weren't getting? Okay, I'll pause there. Anthony, anything else you would add into bringing some texture to these examples?
Yeah, I think getting next to the lived experience is really important. So we use the example of folks who are trying to get dental services. I'd also be interested in speaking with those who don't usually have their voices heard on getting services. What are some of the barriers, for instance? What are some of the challenges, like the transportation issue that you mentioned? And very often in having these conversations, people will give you gold nuggets of wisdom that you may not hear from the main stakeholders in the conversation. So I want to make sure not to miss an opportunity to listen to as many folks as possible who are kind of surrounding whatever service it is, or whatever matter it may be that you're trying to study. I think that those conversations always yield some sort of fruit.
So as people are taking a moment to think about their own programs and their own initiatives, I'd be interested in what challenges or questions that people have as they think about actually doing this in your own spaces. When you think about implementing a culturally responsive evaluation, what are things that you're most worried about, or barriers that you think you might come up against, or questions you have about how to actually do this that might get in the way of you doing it? And we look forward to getting some questions and some reflections into the chat. So please, this is an open space. We're all constantly on the path of becoming culturally responsive and equitable evaluators. So this is a learning space for everybody. So please feel free to put things and questions into chat. I will say from our experience, a major potential barrier to doing culturally responsive and equitable evaluation is time. So oftentimes evaluation comes up in, let's say, in nonprofit organizations because there's a grant, or because there is a report that's coming up, and that there's not enough time to put in the amount of resources to engage stakeholders. It takes a lot of time to do that, and again, a lot of resources, especially in the context of a pandemic, where how do you engage stakeholders in, you know, virtual and remote ways? That's a whole nother conversation that, you know, that we could also have. But if you think about it as a spectrum of fully engaging every single voice of those that are involved in the impact, the potential impact of a program, would take forever, right? Like, no one has that amount of time. But if that's on one end of the spectrum, and then on the other end is one person maybe who isn't involved in the programming at all, one person writing the plan, conducting the evaluation from afar, and writing the report. That takes probably the least amount of time, but is the least culturally responsive and equitable. And so finding somewhere in between is the goal. And there is no one perfect space in between. We all have lots of different challenges and barriers in doing this work. And sometimes engaging youth in the collection of data is not possible. That takes a lot of time. That takes a lot of support and infrastructure. That's just not possible. But that doesn't mean that there's then nothing, that there's no options for then engaging stakeholders. One of the ways, and Anthony spoke to this, if you don't have a lot of time, one of the best ways to start engaging stakeholders in this process is in the co-interpretation of data that you're collecting. So if you're looking for one space to start in this whole kind of spectrum of different phases, that making sense space, where many of you collect more data than you probably know what to do with, and for lots of different reasons, lots of different purposes. And so you have all these different types of data that you also are seeing some patterns from. So let's say that you are starting to see some patterns. You collect data on who comes to your programs and maybe some demographic data about the people who are participating in your programs. And then maybe you have a survey of those that have participated that ask them, what did you get out of this experience? So you have some output, and again, we'll talk about logic models at the next webinar, but you have some information about who is getting how much of your program, and you have some information about what changes might be happening because they're going to your program. That's great. That's super interesting. So you put that together in a one-page. Sometimes when we do data parties, we talk about them as data placemats because it makes it feel like more of a party. So you create a data placemat or a one-page summary, and you invite all different stakeholders to this conversation. And you say, here are patterns that we see in these data. What do they mean to you? And there's a whole, there's a series of prompt questions that you can think of. Is what do you see in these data? Is there anything that's surprising to you? Do you see yourselves in these data? And when you have these conversations across lots of different diverse voices, you start to really see how important it is to have diverse voices because you see different meaning being made. It also points you into other directions and spaces where you might need to go get data, because people will say, this is interesting, but I wish I knew A. And then you start to think about where else can you go collect data that will help you more fully understand what it is that you're doing. So again, one of those spaces that you can really start to engage multiple stakeholders without taking, 2 years to do the program evaluation and fully engage all different voices is in that making sense space or the co-interpretation space. Okay, I'm going to pause again. Hopefully you all are having an opportunity to kind of dig in and think a little bit about, in the context of one of your own programs, around what kinds of questions you might ask, what kinds of contexts are important to those questions, what kind of outcomes you're hoping to get to with that program. Other questions that people have?
So I'm not sure how this is working for people. I feel like we're kind of jumping back and forth between saying, here's some time to think on yourself and here's some more information. So sorry about that, but I'll just throw another prompt out there that maybe to try to elicit some questions or comments. So maybe how are you already doing some of this? In what ways do you feel like you're already doing culturally responsive and equitable evaluation? You just haven't been using that name, that label for it. And how has that proven to be helpful for you to improve your work or deepen your understanding? And then what's frustrating you, or what feels really idealistic and utopian here about all this? Like to Annalee's point about time, I could also all of you saying, okay, that sounds great, but we only got so many staff and only so much money, and at the end of the day, a funder is going to want to report for us. So great, that all sounds good, but how the heck are we going to do this? So what are some of your kind of frustrations or concerns in addition to just basic time to how to implement this, or things that kind of come up against in the past when you've tried to maybe try some of these techniques and you haven't had the resources to do it. What would that look like to move past those frustrations? What would you need from funders or others in the community to help you create this space to do that?
And as people are thinking, thank you, Angie, I see your comment in the chat. I can bring in another example again, as people are kind of thinking through responding to Andy's prompt. Similar to bringing in lots of voices to making sense of the work in that last stage, so taking action, you can think about who are the audiences in the best position to make change. So in the example of the dental care program, there, if you're hoping to make changes in how the program is actually structured or implemented, the people with decision-making power for that might be the program directors or might be the community organizational partners. And so in thinking about that audience, think about crafting a report or crafting findings in a way that makes it easy for them to act on them, is to say, here's what we found, here's what we think it means, and here's what we think you should do about it. To make it easy for these decision makers, for example, in the dental care program, to say, okay, transportation came up as a really big issue. People don't have access to dental care because of transportation. So maybe the programming changes so that it is, we look at the bus lines, we look at where are the places where people don't have access to dental clinics, and that we purposely place our programming in those spaces. And so that's a very specific recommendation that's actionable. I think oftentimes in more traditional evaluation reports, there's one gigantic report, everything's in there, and you don't make it easy for people to act on it and to make sense of it. And so breaking out what you're finding into formats for who it is that you're speaking with is more likely to end up in change. So that could be for the program director example, like there's a one page for the program directors. Then you think about, how are you going to report out what you found, what you think it means, and what do you think should happen because of it to the families who are served by this dental program? So that might look different. You might have a summary of findings, you might have a summary of what you think those findings mean, and then you might have some recommendations for families and communities for how they can access or advocate for more programs like this, or advocate for policy change so that there's greater access to dental care. And then you might have a third one that is focused on policymakers. Here's what we found, here's what we think it means, and here's what we think you should do about it. That's a different set of recommendations because it's a different sphere of influence, from the program directors to families to the policymakers. So those recommendations, it's drawing on similar data from your evaluation, but it's being responsive to different audiences and what they have control over and what they have power over, so that the reporting itself becomes responsive to the different audiences in which you want to engage. So Zach, I see you in chat, thank you. I'm going to read this out loud so people can hear it. We have a parent leadership group that helps us think about the needs of our families, but we haven't set aside time of staff and students to regularly get their input. Everyone is really busy and it's tough to get people together, except for the primary functions of the program. Okay, that's a great example, thank you. So I'm gonna respond to this, but please let me know if I'm not understanding what the context is of the program that you're talking about. So you have this group, and it sounds like this parent leadership group is also somewhat in an advisory role. And that especially right now, everyone is, pulled in a million different directions. And sometimes something like what we're describing is not the primary role of that group. And so it just feels like it's an add-on. One of the things that we've done in some examples in some other programs that have had similar challenges is, instead of trying to get the entire group to engage in this process, we see if there's one or two who are interested in being maybe more of a sustainable part of the evaluation process. So maybe there are one or two parents, or there are one or two students or youth who are interested in being part of the evaluation team, and that they're compensated for their time and expertise. That then they become the liaison to that group. And you're not asking for, a group of 10 people to try to get together every month. So, give feedback. That's really hard, especially right now. So we have found some success in finding, again, a much smaller group of 1 to 2 who are interested in being a part of a team. And then it kind of spreads, right? From there, it kind of spreads. And it's, again, not asking people to then speak for an entire community of people or a particular stakeholder group, but it's at least a kind of a wedge in, and then you can go from there. And compensation is important for people's time and expertise. And I think once people also start to recognize that you are recognizing their time and expertise as that, then that can also be kind of contagious as well.
Annalee, there's a really good question from Angie in the Q&A that kind of dovetails with what you were just talking about. Angie's question is there an approach that can systematize this type of evaluation to embed it in our ongoing work versus a one-time event that feels like a high demand on time and staff resources? So you were kind of starting to respond, I think, in a way to that already, Annalee, but can you say a little bit more about ways to do that?
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, that's a great question. And it also, shows that it's evaluation as part of what you're doing, not an add-on. So a couple different examples. Think about one of the things that we tend to do is we talk with programs and talk with organizations about the systems they already have in place. So where are the spaces where there already is ongoing work? Maybe it's not specifically focused on evaluation, but that you can add this into that space in a way to systematize it. And I'll give you an example. So there's a community organization that we work with here in Madison, a community center, where there are staff meetings bi-weekly. And they are already happening. So the staff meetings are already happening bi-weekly. And that the staff have to interact with data all the time, but not necessarily in a reflective kind of big picture meta way. And so if you have somebody, so what we've done is created a very short 1-page, like a snapshot. And it's always the same indicators that we're looking at that the group came up with. So that the group says, this is what we want to track. Like we want to follow this because it's important to us understanding how we're doing it and how well we're doing it. So for example, there might be one section of this 1-pager that has participation numbers, who's participating, how much, how's that going? And then there might be another section where there are some voices of those who are involved in the programming. And so that piece and the structure of it, the format of it looks the same. So people kind of start to learn to look for it, and that's what they're going to be, focused on. And that you take 15 minutes at that staff meeting, maybe once a month. And it's 15 minutes and it becomes kind of like a mini data party. And so it starts to habituate the group to looking together at data and learning from it, not in a high stakes way. It's not a focus group. And maybe you're not even, maybe that the content of what that 1-pager isn't changing monthly, because that's also a lot of work too. But that you have space, 15 minutes it can be, where you start to habituate again towards this evaluative thinking and towards this systematic process of let's think about data, let's look at data together, and then talk about what we're going to do about it and how we make sense of it.
Annalee, earlier, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Earlier in some of your comments, you were talking about youth evaluation teams, which I know you and I believe Anthony, you've worked with and helped kind of facilitate quite a bit. Annalee, you said at one point it's actually more valid when youth are collecting the data and doing the research. Why? Why is that more valid? And how can you kind of help folks kind of make that case and use language to explain why these types of evaluation techniques are more valid to folks like us, the funder, so when they're writing a grant proposal, they can explain, you know, we're using this type of evaluation. We need funding to help us support this type of evaluation in addition to our program costs. This is why it's really critical. This is why it's actually more valid and sound. This is why we're actually going to better understand our work. So can you help flesh that out a little bit?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when you think about whether it's evaluation or research, validity is at the core of what you're trying to do, right? Validity and reliability, but validity, the whole idea of validity is that you are studying what you think you're studying. And there's lots of different types of validity. So when you think about creating a survey, surveys that are validated surveys, it means that there's been a study of that survey where they've studied, are the questions in the survey actually asking what they think they're asking, or do we need to rephrase it or whatever? So the construct or idea of validity, that the idea is what you think you're getting at. So having, let's say it's a youth program, having youth at the center of the process helps tremendously towards that idea or construct validity. Because if the programming is focused on youth, and it is in the context of young people's lives, young people are the best people to define what that means and to define what, like, for example, what does wellness mean? I am not in a good position to define what wellness means for youth. Youth are. So if we're hoping to improve the wellness of youth, we need their voices in to even define what that means. And then not only to define what wellness means, but to define the criteria through which it's happening. So what does it mean when somebody feels well? What does it mean when somebody has a sense of belonging? So we have all these words, and I'm coming from the context of education. We have all these words that we think we all are on the same page of about what that means, like learning, or like academic achievement, but that actually are very, very complex. So having youth involved in just the definition of these terms or these definitions of ideas that you're trying to go after. So there's this idea of idea of validity. There's also interrelational validity. So again, these are all, we're evaluating programs created for and with humans. So that means there's interrelational dynamics going on. And that interrelational dynamics are key to understanding what you're trying to do and what you're hoping to change because of it. And so youth helping you to understand what that interrelationality, I think I made that word up, interrelationalness is really, really important. I'm going to point people to, so this is the worksheet that hopefully you have made very messy right now with lots of different ideas and drawings, etc. But at the last page, there are a couple different resources around culturally responsive and equitable evaluation. So the first is a statement of our commitment to equity of a team of evaluators at WCR, where Anthony and I are located. Then there's a resource around different terms we use specific to culturally responsive and equitable evaluation. This last piece is one of the key articles from some of the key scholars of culturally responsive evaluation. And it's a really good place to go and also to cite when you're trying to make the case that engaging stakeholder voice is actually part of a valid evaluation design. And so it's a thick kind of long piece of writing, but important for you to dig into to understand why this actually improves the validity of the design. Lastly, I'll say that if you're hoping to actually change things as a result of the evaluation work, it's best to engage those that you're hoping to make change with. So in that case, it would be youth. Okay, I know we only have a couple minutes left. So are there any other questions before we talk about what our next webinar is going to be? Okay. Okay, great, thank you. And I appreciate those questions in chat. Those were wonderful, thank you. So we have the next webinar in our series is going to be on logic models and theories of action. So it's going to really dig in on that first part of the stage, which is defining the it itself. And we will do this drawing on a culturally responsive framework to understanding how do we have a logic model that actually is culturally responsive to the context and to the identities of those that you're working with. So that's on February 18th at 11 a.m. Andy, can I kick it over to you to talk more about how to register for that webinar and then some of the other resources available from MCF?
Yeah, Liz, are you still there? Do you have that registration link easy at hand? If not, I can try to dig for it. We will also email it out. So everyone who's attended today and everyone who registered, thanks, Liz, that's great. We'll send out a link to watch the recording. Again, the registration link for the next webinar in February. And then any additional resources that we talked about today. And I would just say in general, so this is a little bit of an experiment we're engulfing on, or as MCF, the world of kind of learning about new techniques and methods and approaches to evaluation is still pretty new for us as well. So we'd love any feedback you have about this session, and also just encourage you to reach out with specific questions or resources that you all that would be helpful for you all to have. And then I'll also just say that, you know, with our grants, for those of you who are grantees or thinking of applying for grants, we encourage folks to build in evaluation costs into their proposals. And we're really trying to be serious about supporting that work and acknowledging that this just doesn't happen on its own, that there are resources that are needed to make it happen. So feel free to talk to us about that, and hopefully this is a launching off point to help you feel more comfortable that we're serious about that. So yeah, those are the things I've got to say. Thank you again, everyone, for coming, and thank you, Annalee and Anthony, for doing this with us.
Thank you so much, everyone. And we look forward to continuing the conversation together. And take care.